Welcome to Drift to Sleep. Hello friend, thanks for listening. Let your body settle now. Let your shoulders soften. Let your hands rest loosely wherever they are. Take one slow breath in and let it go. Tonight's story is called The Quiltmaker and the Four Small Lights. It is a gentle tale of seasons, softness, and a blanket stitched with quiet kindness. There will be warm thread, there will be small lanterns, there will be mossy paths, sleepy kitchens, glowing windows, and snow resting peacefully on the roof. Nothing will hurry here, so let your thoughts loosen, let the room around you become still. And when you are ready, come with me into the story. Long ago, in a valley where the hills folded over one another like green blankets, there stood a little cottage with a blue door. The cottage belonged to a quilt maker named Ellen. Ellen was not famous. She did not sell her quilts in grand markets. She did not travel from town to town with a cart full of silk and ribbons. She simply made blankets for anyone who needed warmth. A blanket for a baby born in late rain, a blanket for an old shepherd whose knees ached in cold weather, a blanket for a baker who liked to nap beside the cooling oven after sunrise. Ellen believed every blanket should hold a little piece, so she stitched slowly. She chose her cloth by touch. Soft cotton, warm wool, linen smooth as quiet water, flannel with the gentle weight of sleep. Her cottage sat at the very top of a meadow path. In spring, the path was edged with tiny blue flowers. In summer, bees moved through clover in slow golden circles. In autumn, the grass turned honey brown. In winter, snow covered every stone, and the path became a pale ribbon under the moon. Inside the cottage, the rooms were small and warm. There was a kitchen with copper pots hanging above the stove. There was a sitting room with a low chair by the hearth. There was a wooden table beneath the window, where Ellen cut fabric and folded thread. At night, she worked by lamplight. The lamp had a glass shade the color of warm cream. When it glowed, the whole room seemed to breathe more slowly. One evening, at the end of winter, Ellen sat with a new quilt spread across her lap. It was meant to be a dream quilt, not a quilt for one person only. Not a quilt for a bed in one house. This quilt was for the little resting room beside the village library, where anyone could come when they felt weary. Children came there after lessons. Travelers came there when rain soaked their coats. The librarian came there when her eyes grew tired from reading tiny print. Ellen wanted the quilt to feel like a safe place. She had already stitched the center, a square of pale cream, a square of soft green, a square of cloudy blue, a square of warm brown. But the quilt did not feel finished. Ellen held it in her hands and listened. All good quilts, she believed, had a way of speaking, not in words, not loudly, but in a feeling. This one felt unfinished, as if it were waiting for something. Ellen leaned back in her chair. The fire gave a soft pop. The clock ticked slowly on the wall. Outside, the last snow of winter rested on the garden fence. Then, just as Ellen began to yawn, she saw a tiny light at the window. It was no larger than a button. It glowed pale green. Ellen blinked. The light bobbed once, twice, then drifted away from the glass. Ellen stood and opened the door. The night air was cool, but not sharp. Somewhere beneath the snow, the earth was beginning to wake. The little green light hovered over the garden path. Then it moved forward. Ellen wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and followed. The green light led Ellen only a short distance, down the path and into the sleeping garden. Her boots pressed softly into patches of melting snow. Water dripped from the eaves in a slow, steady rhythm. Drip, pause, drip. The garden smelled of damp soil and old leaves, a sleepy smell, a beginning smell. The light floated toward a patch of bare earth beneath a hazel bush. There, tucked between two stones, Ellen saw the first spring shoot. It was small and folded, a green curl no longer than her thumb. The tiny light settled on it like a dewdrop. Ellen knelt carefully. "Well," she whispered, "there you are." The shoot trembled, though there was hardly any breeze. Then the green light brightened, and Ellen understood what her quilt was missing. It needed the feeling of beginnings, not loud beginnings, not rushing beginnings, but the tender kind. The first stretch after sleep, the first warm sip of tea, the first line of a letter, the first bird call before dawn. Ellen reached into the pocket of her shawl and found a small spool of thread. She had not placed it there, at least, she did not remember doing so. The thread was green, but not like grass. It was softer, lighter, almost silver in the moonlight. She smiled. The little light rose from the chute and drifted back toward the cottage, as if its work was done. Ellen returned inside. Before sleeping, she made herself a cup of chamomile tea. She added 1 spoon of honey and stirred slowly. The spoon made a gentle sound against the cup. Round and round. Soft and slow. Then she sat at her table and stitched the green thread along one corner of the quilt. She made tiny leaves, not perfect leaves, not identical leaves, just simple, sleepy shapes curling around the edge. As she worked, the cottage warmed around her, the kettle cooled, the fire settled. The old wooden walls creaked once, then became still. When the first corner was finished, Ellen touched it with her fingertips. The quilt felt different now, a little more awake, a little more alive. She folded it neatly over the chair and went to bed. That night, she dreamed of roots growing quietly under dark soil. No hurry, no effort, only patient growth. And when morning came, the garden outside her window had changed. The snow was gone. Spring widened into long blue mornings. Ellen returned to her familiar rhythm. She washed fabric in a wooden basin and hung it on the line. She swept the cottage floor with a straw broom. She baked oatcakes on cool mornings and berry buns when the bushes near the lane began to fruit. Each evening she stitched. The dream quilt lay across her lap like a small field. The green corner glowed softly in lamplight, but still, the quilt was not complete. One summer afternoon, when the sun was warm and the cottage windows were open, Ellen heard a tapping sound. Tap, tap, tap. Not at the door, at the pantry shelf. She set down her needle. On the shelf, beside a jar of dried mint, was a tiny golden light. This one was warmer than the green one. It shimmered like sun through honey. The light slipped through the open window and floated outside. Ellen followed it. The day was quiet and bright. In the meadow, grasshoppers clicked softly in the long grass. Butterflies moved as if they were pieces of colored paper, carried by a gentle hand. The air smelled of thyme, clover, and warm stone. The golden light drifted down the hill. Ellen walked slowly behind it, carrying a small basket on her arm. She did not know why she brought the basket. It simply felt right. The path wound past the mill pond, where ducks slept in the shade of willow leaves. It passed a row of beehives behind the baker's house. It passed a little footbridge that crossed a stream clear enough to show every pebble beneath. At the far end of the valley was an old orchard. No one owned it anymore. Or perhaps everyone did. People came there to pick fruit when it was ripe. Children came there to sit in the branches and tell soft secrets. Birds came there because the trees were generous. The golden light entered the orchard and settled beneath a pear tree. Ellen stepped into the shade. The ground was cool there, speckled with sunlight, dotted with small fallen pears. She sat with her back against the tree and breathed. The orchard had its own kind of quiet. Leaves whispered above. Bees hummed somewhere far off. A ripe pear dropped into the grass with a little thump. Ellen laughed under her breath. So this is what you wanted to show me. The golden light circled her basket. Inside it, Ellen found another spool of thread. This one was yellow gold, like late afternoon. Ellen understood. The quilt needed the feeling of being nourished, simple sweetness, rest in shade, fruit warm from the sun, the comfort of having enough. She filled her basket with pears, only the ones already resting on the grass, only what the tree had offered. Then she sat a while longer beneath the branches. She ate one pear slowly. It was soft and sweet, with juice that ran over her fingers. She wiped her hand on a cloth and leaned her head back against the bark. Above her, the leaves moved in a slow green shimmer. For a moment, there was nothing to fix, nothing to finish, nothing to decide, only shade, only sweetness, only the golden light resting near her shoe. When the sun began to lower, Ellen walked home. The light followed her as far as the blue door, then rose into the evening and disappeared. That night, Ellen made pear tea with cinnamon. She stitched golden thread into the second corner of the quilt. This time she made little circles, small suns, small fruits, small lanterns. Each one held its own glow. The quilt warmed beneath her hands. Summer slowly folded into autumn. The mornings grew misty. The hills turned copper and russet. The village chimneys began to send up thin lines of smoke. Ellen liked autumn work best. She darned socks, she mended sleeves, she lined baskets with old cloth so apples would not bruise. Every afternoon, she lit the stove earlier. Every evening, she made something warm, barley soup, baked pumpkin, toast with plum jam, tea dark with spices. The dream quilt now had 2 finished corners, green for beginnings, gold for being nourished. But 2 corners were still plain. One rainy evening, Ellen was sorting buttons at the table, large buttons, tiny buttons, wooden buttons, pearl buttons, one shaped like a moon. Rain brushed softly against the window. The fire was low. The cottage smelled of soup, wool and rosemary. Then the moon-shaped button rolled across the table by itself. Ellen watched it turn in a slow circle. Beside it, a third light appeared. Amber, deep and warm, the color of candlelight in a window. It floated toward the door. Ellen put on her brown cloak and followed. Outside, the rain was very gentle, not enough to soak her, just enough to silver the path and darken the fallen leaves. The amber light moved toward the village. Ellen walked slowly, listening to the small sounds of evening, rain ticking on wooden signs, water running along the road. A cartwheel creaking somewhere ahead, a dog sighing under a porch. In the village square, most shops were closing, but one window still glowed. It belonged to the clockmaker. Ellen had passed the shop many times but rarely gone inside. Tonight the amber light slipped beneath the door. A bell gave a tiny chime as Ellen entered. The shop was full of clocks, tall clocks, round clocks, pocket clocks, wall clocks with painted flowers. Little clocks no bigger than teacups. But the room was not noisy. All the ticking blended together until it sounded like soft rain. Behind the counter sat the clockmaker, an old woman with silver hair braided down one shoulder. She looked up and smiled. "Good evening, Ellen," she said. "I wondered when you would come." Ellen was not surprised that the clockmaker knew her name. In villages like that, everyone knew almost everyone. But there was something in the old woman's voice that made the room feel deeper, as if the walls had moved back a little, as if the clocks were not counting time, but caring for it. The amber light settled on a small wooden box beside the counter. The clockmaker opened it. Inside was a spool of brown thread. Not dull brown, not ordinary brown. It held many colors inside it. Chestnut, tea, bark after rain, bread crust, the quiet shadow beneath a chair by the fire. "This is for the third corner," said the clockmaker. Ellen touched the thread. "What does it hold?" The clockmaker looked around the shop. "Remembering," she said softly, "but only the kind that comforts." Ellen nodded. There were memories like stones in a pocket, too heavy to carry at night, but there were other memories. A grandmother humming while kneading dough. A favorite mug held in both hands, the smell of clean sheets, the sound of someone coming home. Those memories could be stitched into warmth. The clockmaker closed the box and placed the spool in Ellen's palm. "Do not rush this corner," she said. "Let it tick along at its own pace." Ellen thanked her. Before leaving, she noticed a tiny clock on the counter. It had no numbers, only little painted stars. "How do you read that one?" Ellen asked. The clockmaker smiled. "You don't," she said. "That one is for rooms where no one needs to know the time." Ellen liked that very much. She stepped back into the rain, and the amber light floated beside her. On the walk home, the village seemed especially peaceful. Windows glowed, curtains moved, a kettle sang behind one door, someone laughed quietly behind another. Ellen thought of all the lives resting inside those houses, all the small meals, all the folded blankets, all the lamps being turned down for sleep. When she reached her cottage, the amber light paused above the doorstep. Then it became smaller and smaller, until it looked like a spark. Then it was gone. That night, Ellen stitched brown thread into the third corner. She made little houses, a roof, a window, a chimney, then another and another. Not one house looked the same. Some leaned to the left. Some had round doors, some had crooked chimneys, some had tiny gardens. As she stitched, the clocks in her memory ticked softly. The rain outside slowed, the fire settled into embers. Ellen did not finish until late, but she did not feel tired in a sharp way. She felt tired like a well-read book, like a field after harvest, like a candle ready to be blown out. Winter arrived without hurry. First came frost on the well rope, then white breath in the morning. Then one night, while everyone slept, snow covered the valley. When Ellen woke, The world outside her window was pale and quiet. The roof of the shed wore a smooth white cap. The garden fence had disappeared halfway into snow. The bare branches of the apple tree held little lines of brightness. Ellen wrapped herself in a thick shawl and made porridge with cream. The cottage was warm. The stove clicked softly. The kettle breathed steam. A loaf of dark bread cooled beneath a cloth. The dream quilt lay folded on the chair. 3 corners finished, green for beginnings, gold for being nourished, brown for comforting memories. Only the last corner remained. Ellen wondered when the 4th light would come. She waited through morning. She waited through afternoon. No light appeared. She swept the hearth. She polished her thimble. She made lentil soup with carrots and bay leaves. She stacked wood beside the door. Still no light. By evening, the snow was falling again. Large flakes drifted past the window. Ellen lit the lamp and sat beside the quilt. Perhaps, she said aloud, the last corner is meant to stay plain. The cottage listened, the fire listened, the snow listened. Then from somewhere above came a soft sound, not tapping, not chiming. A gentle ringing. Ellen looked toward the ceiling. The sound came again, a small silver note. She carried the lamp to the back room and climbed the narrow stairs to the attic. The attic was cold, but not unpleasant. It smelled of cedar trunks, dried lavender, and old wool. Moonlight entered through a round window at the peak of the roof. In the center of the attic stood a small cradle. Ellen had seen it before. It had belonged to someone in her family long ago. Above the cradle hung a little silver bell on a faded ribbon, and beside the bell floated the 4th light, white, soft, almost blue at the edges. It did not flicker. It glowed steadily, like snow under stars. Ellen stepped closer. The bell rang once more. A note so gentle it seemed to smooth the air. Inside the cradle lay a spool of thread, white thread. But when Ellen lifted it, she saw that it was not only white, it held silver and pale blue and the faintest blush of dawn. Ellen sat on an old cedar chest. The attic was quiet around her. Below, the fire warmed the cottage. Outside, snow softened the whole valley. The white light drifted down and rested on the back of her hand. Ellen understood the last thing the quilt needed: stillness, not loneliness, not emptiness, but the deep stillness that lets the heart rest. The pause between 2 breaths, the quiet after a bedtime story. The gentle darkness after the lamp is turned out, the safe silence of knowing there is nothing more to do. Elin stayed in the attic for a long while. She did not sew yet. She did not hurry downstairs. She simply sat with the white thread in her lap and listened to the snow. It made almost no sound, and yet, somehow, the whole night was full of it. At last, she carried the spool downstairs. She warmed her hands by the fire. Then she began the final corner. With the white thread, She stitched little stars, some large, some tiny, some barely there. She stitched a crescent moon, a sleeping hill, a small path fading into snow. The work was slow. Her eyes grew heavy, but each stitch seemed to place a little quiet into the cloth. When the final star was done, Elin tied the last knot. She spread the quilt over the table. For a moment, nothing happened. Then all four corners gave a soft glow, green, gold, amber, white, not bright enough to fill the room, only bright enough to comfort it. The quilt looked simple. A person passing by might have seen only cloth and thread, but Elin could feel what it held. A beginning, a sweetness, a memory, a stillness. Together they made peace. Elin folded the quilt carefully and held it against her chest. It was warm, not from the fire, from something quieter. The next morning, Ellen carried the finished quilt down the snowy hill to the village library. The library was an old stone building with ivy sleeping against one wall. Inside, it smelled of paper, beeswax and polished wood. The librarian, a tall woman with round spectacles, was arranging books by the front desk. When she saw Ellen, she smiled. "You finished it." "I think so," said Ellen. Together they carried the quilt to the little resting room at the back of the library. It was a small room with one window, one soft chair, one narrow bed, and a shelf of quiet books. Books of poems, books of gentle maps, books about birds, trees, bread, stars, and weather. Ellen spread the quilt across the bed. The room seemed to settle around it. The librarian touched one corner. "Oh," she whispered. She did not say more. She did not need to. That afternoon, the first person to use the quilt was a little boy who had stayed too long in the children's corner and grown sleepy over a picture book. He curled beneath the blanket and dreamed of green shoots pushing through warm earth. Then came a traveller whose boots were wet from snow. She rested beneath the quilt and dreamed of pears in a sunny orchard. Later, the clockmaker came to return a book about moths. She sat under the quilt for only 10 minutes, but when she rose, her eyes were bright and peaceful. Near closing time, the librarian herself lay down beneath it. She meant only to test the weight, only for a moment, but the quilt was soft, the room was warm. Snow moved past the window in slow white feathers. Soon the librarian was asleep. Ellen walked home at dusk. The valley was blue with evening. Smoke rose from chimneys in quiet lines. Lanterns glowed behind curtains. The snow on the path held the shape of her footsteps. When she reached her cottage, she found it waiting for her. The blue door, the warm stove, the table by the window, the chair beside the hearth. Everything simple, everything enough. She made a small supper, bread, soup, a spoonful of plum jam, tea with a little milk. Then she washed her bowl, banked the fire, and sat for a while in the quiet. She thought of the 4 lights, the green light in the thawing garden, the golden light in the orchard, the amber light in the clockmaker's shop, the white light in the attic snow. Perhaps they had been fairies. Perhaps they had been dreams. Perhaps they had been only the cottage helping in its own old way. Ellen did not need to know. Some things are kinder when they remain a little mysterious. She went to bed early. Her own blanket was plain grey wool, soft from many years of use. She pulled it up to her chin. Outside, the snow continued to fall. Inside, the cottage grew quiet. The kettle cooled. The floorboards settled. The last ember in the hearth glowed, then dimmed. Ellen closed her eyes. She felt the day loosen around her. No more stitching, no more walking. No more wondering what was missing, only rest, only warmth. Only the soft darkness of a safe winter night. And far down the hill, in the little resting room of the village library, the dream quilt lay ready, ready for anyone who needed a gentle beginning, ready for anyone who needed sweetness, ready for anyone who needed a comforting memory, ready for anyone who needed stillness. The 4 corners rested quietly. Green, gold, amber, white, like 4 small breaths, in and out, in and out. The valley slept beneath snow. The cottage slept on the hill. The library slept beside the square. And Ellen, warm under her old grey blanket, drifted deeper and deeper into peaceful sleep. The last thing she imagined was a needle passing through cloth, down through softness, up through light, down through quiet, up through dreams, again and again, slower, softer, until even that gentle thought faded and there was only rest. And now, our story has come to its quiet end. Ellen is sleeping peacefully in her little cottage on the hill. The blue door is resting beneath the moonlight. The village library is warm and still, and the dream quilt is waiting softly in the small room, holding its 4 gentle lights. You do not need to follow the seasons any farther tonight. Just rest here. Let the green light of spring become soft in your thoughts. Let the golden sweetness of summer grow quiet and low. Let the amber memories of autumn settle gently, and let the white stillness of winter cover everything like snow. Thank you for listening to Drift to Sleep. I'm Adele Nguyen, and I'll be back soon with more cozy sleep stories and bedtime stories. For now, let your eyes stay closed, let your body rest, let the night hold you gently while the world turns slowly toward morning. Sleep well. Good night.